Morning, everyone. Vinod, thank you so much for being here. I had the pleasure of seeing you get interviewed by our own Kevin Zhang a couple of years ago at the summit. I think it's your third or fourth summit now. It's a pleasure to have you.
I always love coming here. So
it's a great time. So today, the topic of the conversation is going to be, what everyone's been talking about for the last 2.5 years. We're going to be talking about the AI landscape and where things are going. You were famously one of the first major institutional investors in OpenAI. You've been known to make early and accurate predictions about the landscape. I think a few months ago you wrote a new paper, AI Dystopia or Utopia. Tell us about that. Give us the lay of the land and kind of where things are at right now.
So I wrote this paper. It's sort of long and boring, but I wanted to first address all the criticism of AI. That's why I addressed dystopia first. And there is a dystopian vision that can happen in society. I suggest that dystopia will be by choice in societies. Each country, each region will regulate AI differently. And so we will get choice on how we regulate, what we allow, what we permit. We all have the beginnings of some of these, like GDPR and data regulations and data share. I do think political systems and political choices will decide whether we have dystopia or utopia, not companies. On the other hand, the utopia piece of it will be driven by entrepreneurs. Large innovation, and people ask me what will change, and I answer what won't change. And it depends a lot on which time period you're talking about. I would suggest, from an economic point of view, the next 5 years will look like productivity improvements, somewhat accelerating from where we are today. But 2030 to 2040, we will see large-scale disruption, job displacement, at a level we haven't seen before. And we'll answer the question, do we really like that idea? We'll have, I suspect, the beginnings by the mid-30s of what I call a hugely deflationary economy. I just had a long conversation with a couple of people from the Chicago school talking about the nature of a deflationary economy that's a good deflation, which is very different than every other deflationary cycle we've seen. So we'll see this deflationary cycle, and then in the 2040s, sort of 15 years to 25 years out, we will see almost a utopic possibility. I have suggested before that in a country like India, $1 billion would be all it takes out of a multi-trillion-dollar economy to do free primary care for every citizen, $1 a month, for example, to provide primary care at that scale. And I first talked about this in 2012. It was called, I had a blog called Do We Need Doctors in TechCrunch? So we will see that scale of change. And the production of goods and services will increase dramatically. The consumption will have to increase dramatically, but prices will have to deflate because of the dramatic increase in production of all kinds of, almost every good and services.
I think the utopia-dystopia dichotomy is a pretty useful framework for talking about this discussion. Zooming on the utopian side for a minute, where do you think the most opportunity and value accruement in the landscape is right now? And
before I go there, let me elaborate on one thing. Last year we saw the Screen Actors Guild strike here in LA. And my conclusion was everybody who signed up to that agreement with the Screen Actors Guild will be hugely disadvantaged and may go out of business because new players who are not constrained by that will win. So whether and when AI replaces jobs, it's 100% clear that people who don't adapt AI will be obsoleted by people who do. And that's probably the next 5 to 7 years, 10 years. So we'll see this large transition. But let me come back to your question.
Yeah, I was just asking about where you see the most opportunity and value accruement in the AI landscape right now, and what do you think investors are getting right? What do you think they're misunderstanding?
Depends on, again, the time frame. Let me come. I made a dozen predictions for the planet in the year 2050. Each of those dozen, and that was at TED. I did a TED talk last year. I believe all of those are reasonably high probability predictions, though they seem implausible. In fact, I call them implausible tomorrows. But let me start much closer to home, the next 5 years. Every time there's a large opportunity, and AI is a large opportunity, investors move from fear to greed. And we are seeing the great greed phase. Nobody wants to be left out. So I would speculate many of the valuations that we are seeing today will have down rounds in VC terms. Most companies, I would guess more than 80%, will lose money. The nice thing, more money will be made than lost. I first used this chart in the late 80s, describing the PC business. In fact, had the statement that a few companies will be worth a lot. We see that in the Microsofts of the world. And then a lot of money lost. And we will see the same phenomena in AI. It'll repeat itself because investors are being indiscriminate. So when I look at an area like software programming, huge area, lots of hype, lots of high valuations, I would guess 80% of those companies will be losing money for investors 5 years from now. There will be a few large players, and it won't just be the large language models. There will be others. But most will lose money, but easily there'll be a couple of startups that are not the large language models that reach a $100 billion valuation. So the trick becomes, in this environment, picking the right players and having nuanced projections. And we spend an incredible amount of time doing this in our shop. What technologies will develop how over the next 5 years? What startups will become roadkill because of this? And what startups will be differentiated or additive to what the LLMs are doing?
To pull on this thread a little bit more, I'm curious. AI sort of came for coding and customer service and various other segments first. What do you think the next few verticals are, the next few dominoes to fall?
I suspect we will see it everywhere. Software programming will definitely be one of it. And I would venture to guess 5 years from now, 80% of you in the audience will have written a computer program if you haven't even looked at code today. That's possible today. I saw a father, non-technical, develop a program to illustrate the solar system for their son, using no programming skills, just using English as a language, to thousands of people inside an enterprise developing applications that had no background in programming or computer science or even technical. And so software is definitely one of them. I just gave a talk to the board of a large health company. It's a healthcare payer and provider. And I said, somebody well within the next 5 years will cut their cost of care in half. About a quarter of all healthcare spend is expertise. It's a primary care doctor, it's an oncologist, it's a musculoskeletal therapist, it's some form of expertise. Somebody will reduce the cost of that by, I would guess, at least 50% within 5 years and likely 80%. Then you have a huge advantage. If you look at large programs like Medicare Advantage and Medicare, if you have that cost structure and nobody else does, you'll see a massive competitive dynamics change. I think the analogy I used in this, and it likely won't be an incumbent. Tesla came on the scene, I think in 2010, the Department of Energy had a forecast for the number of electric cars in the US in 2035 that Tesla exceeded in 2016. Think about it. Wrong by 20 years in a 25-year forecast, accelerating it by 20 years. And they created, more importantly, more market cap than the next 10 players combined in automotive, which is a very staid business. I think the same thing could happen in healthcare if there's a quick mover who goes after this. Those are two large areas. I think education will change dramatically. Already, my wife runs a nonprofit. This is a nonprofit effort. In the last 6 months, 15 million students have used an AI tutor to help them, whether it's to do homework or prepare for a test. In 10 minutes, it assesses in a subject area where your weakness is and can tutor you to your specific weaknesses. It's called ck12.org. It's a nonprofit. They don't charge for anything, but that's a lot of people in a nonprofit. Zero advertising, just word of mouth. People using the tutor. So education. My view is the nature of public transit will change. One of the predictions I was talking about at TED, and by the way, one of my predictions for the 2040s is all primary care will be free, all doctors will be free, all tutors will be free. Public transit driven by AI, and I have a long thesis on this, too long to go into, I'm trying to keep an eye on time, will essentially likely displace most cars in most cities. Think about how radical and implausible a change is. People tell me it won't happen. I can tell you the following. There's a startup we have that uses AI at its core to change the nature of public transit. It's always faster, more convenient, more private than Uber. It's on-demand public system. You show up from your restaurant job at 1 a.m., and a car shows up for you and takes you where you are. As a public transit system, you don't share it, you get dropped off where you do. We bid on 4 projects so far that have been decided. We were not invited to bid on any of these projects. We won 3 outright and shortlisted for the 4th, which I believe is in this Southern California area. So when a startup can win public transit projects, that's pretty ridiculous. But it's really about imagining it boldly. And today I say this public transit, it'll be the principal mode of transit in all cities, because there's no reason it shouldn't be everywhere. It's cheaper than a private car. It'll be faster than a private chauffeur-driven car, even when you take out parking. 1/8 of most cities is taken up in parking spots. I could go through lots of reasons.
So transportation, education, healthcare, these are all, massive, massive industries. Some of them are highly regulated. I do want to make sure we have time to talk about perhaps some of the more, things at the dystopian end of the spectrum. We can talk about, another kind of regulated industry, national security. It's hard not to imagine that control of large-scale models is going to have an enormous impact on our nations and others' kind of military capabilities and other geopolitical strategic capabilities. What is the sovereign model thesis? Where do you fall on the spectrum on this question?
So it was probably 8 years ago, I wrote a blog called AI is Scary for the Right Reasons. Strong AI in the wrong hands. And wrong hands, I mean like President Xi or President Putin, being very explicit about it, is the biggest danger we face as a society. And we've started to see election interference. Persuasive AI could be a powerful tool. And in fact, President Xi said a couple of years, 2 years, 3 years ago, that the next battle will be for people's mind and will be fought on the internet. And at that time, they declared the algorithms for TikTok to be a national security secret. Think about it. This algorithm that shows you what the next video is a national security secret, and TikTok says they can't divest because they can't take the algorithms out of China. Leaving that issue aside, and I was pretty active on the issue in Washington, D.C. last year. Fortunately, I think the right outcome happened. So we will have that kind of thing. And I'll come back to sovereign models, keeping track of time. Because of this, whether I will say the Western values countries, I won't say the West because there's plenty of non-Western countries that have Western values. New Zealand is a good example. We'll have to win this race, and I think it's imperative we do. And China is, of course, investing a lot, and they don't care about data security, data privacy. One of their lead AI guys said to me, we'll win in driverless cars because if we kill a few people along the way, that's just price to be paid. That won't work in the West. That was an actual statement from one of the leading AI figures in China to me.
When is the moment for the U.S. and the West to start getting more directly involved in capital expenditures in this industry?
So before I go there, let me address your issue of sovereign models.
Yeah.
So we've had a thesis that countries will need their own models, just in case a U.S. president decides to, arbitrarily or not, restrict access. Iran, for example, will never rely on U.S. models. But if we are at the brink of a war in Southeast Asia, Japan for sure won't rely on US models. In fact, Japan in the last 2 years has more than doubled its national defense spending, realizing it can't rely on the US. And so we have an investment in Japan called Sakana, strictly focused on Japanese AI, that can serve both commercial interests, but also the very large national security and defense market in Japan, especially as they double their national defense spending. So that's a huge opportunity. We have a similar one in India called Sarvam. So we have specific things we are doing in specific countries, each one with a slightly different focus. In India, the focus is extreme low cost per minute of use. Like below a penny per minute of use is the target, because that is a big consideration in India and probably will be in Africa and other parts of the world too. So region by region, we'll see different needs.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to ask about next, more on the geopolitics side, I guess somewhat tangential to the sovereign model thesis, is as I was saying. This is becoming a major strategic priority to every country in the world. When is the right time for the government to take a more active role? Is there going to be a new Manhattan Project? Is Stargate a step in that direction?
I don't think this needs a Manhattan Project, and a Manhattan Project won't work. Even though it's not a French project, Mistral is a French effort. I personally don't think, because of the level of government pushing on that it will work, personally. And open source will be dominated by Facebook. little regional use of Mistral. That's an example. There's a Canadian project called Cohere. I don't think it'll work long term. They can be successful small businesses, but not large businesses. Since we have limited time, it's worth talking about sort of first in the LLM race, who will win? I keep getting asked that, and should we invest in the current valuation of OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever the latest fashion is? I believe the competitive race now is about applications of this. Companies that have the full stack from chips, and every LLM maker except Anthropic is probably going to do their own chips, and cloud, and model, and application. And when competition appears in one of these layers, these models will have the ability to change pricing for any one layer. If suddenly the model becomes worth 0, you price it at 0, no competition can come up. You price the other things higher. So being able to move pricing will give you a competitive advantage, but the way I would measure these companies is not technology, but revenue traction. And there's clearly winners and losers in revenue traction, because the next 5 years, somebody will reach $100 billion in revenue.
I think I know what your answer is going to be, but OpenAI recently announced that or it was reported that they hit 400 million weekly active users. There's rumors of a 340 billion valuation financing round. How much upside do you still see at OpenAI, having been an early investor?
If a company in the next 5 years has 100 billion in revenue, and that's not implausible. In fact, somebody will have it. I won't say who, because it's still a race. What's the valuation? If you're talking about those growth rates and that much revenue, multiple trillions is not a bad idea. Now, in hardware, it'll be harder to maintain those revenues. So, and this is why Jensen at NVIDIA is quickly adding other things to his repertoire. I want to say one other thing, and by the way, we didn't talk about bipedal robots. In the next 15, 20 years, bipedal robots will be a larger industry in dollars than the current auto industry. Think about it. No auto industry player is talking about the fact there'll be new industry with half the same skills, the other half software. That is larger than the auto industry. I think that's very, very likely. One of my predictions at TED was 1 billion bipedal robots on the planet by 2040 or 2045 or so. Then you're talking about more human labor done by robots than all of humanity, 7 billion people or 8 billion people combined today, because they work three shifts. So farm workers to assembly line workers to nursing assistants with increasing levels of sophistication. So that's one thing to talk about that I just want to flag that isn't in people's head today, that there could be something larger than the auto industry in the auto-like business of manufacturing. The other thing I want to say is, you've heard a lot about copilots, Microsoft Copilot. I think copilots go away. So we are almost exclusively investing in things that do work. We investors in cognition labs. They don't help a computer programmer do their job. They give you a junior intern programmer. We're also giving you a junior oncologist, a junior primary care doctor. So things that actually do the work, not help your people do the work. Because the helping part will become a handicap for people who are doing Copilot. So doing work will be the important thing.
Vinod, it was a pleasure to chat with you about your perspectives on how AI is going to transform all of these different industries, national security, where the industry is going. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, let me finish by saying There's a great paper by an OpenAI researcher called Situational Awareness. It argues, and I completely agree with it, even within the 2030, 2035, 5 to 10 year window, most people are clueless outside of a few hundred people about how large a transition we are likely to see. I would say, think of what we'll see by 2035 by imagining 75 years ago, like 1950, and see what the technology change is. We'll see the same level of change in the next 10 years. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.